We're back with former prosecutor David Henderson and Devlin Barrett, just a reporter for the Washington Post. Devlin, pick up on things there because Trump has repeatedly said that this verdict is a scam. He continues to not deny any type of relationship or interaction with Stormy Daniels back in 2006, despite the testimony we heard on the stand from Stormy Daniels as well. You watch these proceedings day in, day out. What do you make so far of what we're seeing from the former president?
Look, I think that he is trying to come up with politically palatable explanations for a guilty verdict and a guilty on all counts verdict. He's sort of been pre-gaming this outcome for a while, saying that, the jury won't be fair, the judge won't be fair. But now he has a larger problem, which is that the verdict was guilty on all counts. So I think a lot of what he's doing is designed for his political audience. The fundamental problem he has is he's being squeezed. The political solution makes the legal problem worse. That's his basic problem. And so a lot of what he's saying, I was really struck by most of what he said at that post-verdict announcement is bad for his sentencing.
David, I want to talk about an appeals here and an appeals process, I should say. And specifically, first, I want to play for you Todd Blanche responding to the possibility and or likely how it will happen, an appeal.
You're confident on appeal?
Yes.
What's your number one issue? Don't give me a legal brief that you haven't written yet.
I think the recusal issue is meaningful. I think the statute of limitations, the way that the background of why this case was brought is meaningful. I think that the witnesses, I do not think Michael Cohen should ever be somebody who can be relied upon to convict somebody.
Does he have grounds for an appeal? Recusal and the statute of limitations, those things were both dealt with.
They're both dealt with, Yasmin. In a nutshell, will there be an appeal? Absolutely. The percentage is someplace north of 100%. At the same time, does he have a valid basis for an appeal? No. And let's pick up on Stormy Daniels as a good example as to why, because it all comes down to this. You're allowed to have a really bad trial strategy, which they did. A smart trial strategy would be to admit that you had sex with Stormy Daniels. Just stipulate to it. Then you can say, Judge, since we're stipulating, there's no reason to get into any details whatsoever about exactly what happened. And then once the prosecution establishes what her role was, before they call her as a witness, you can say, Judge, we've already stipulated, we established what happened with Stormy Daniels. No need for her to come to the stand except to sensationalize this trial. Instead, they got up an opening statement. They said that she was a liar. And then during the direct examination, they didn't object when certain details came up. And that's important because when they moved for mistrial, in light of some of the details she got into, Judge Masson said, look, when this came up, I was shocked that you didn't object, but you didn't object. You also opened the door to it all the way back beginning to your opening statement. And what he's effectively saying there is, this was your trial strategy, so don't come whining to me now that the fact that you're saying that it didn't work. And that's what appellate courts will look at. They'll also look at the fact that since he was sitting there and since he saw the pitch, he was in the best position to determine whether or not it was a ball, whether or not it was a strike. They're going to give great deference to him as the trial judge. And that's why I say they'll appeal, but I don't think they have a good grounds for appealing.
The New York Times also, David, reporting that an appeal will be kind of a referendum on Judge Juan Merchan. However, the judge has kind of closed off a lot of avenues for that appeal, full well knowing that they were going to appeal based on some of his actions inside that courtroom.
That's exactly right, Yasmin. And as a lawyer watching it, it's something that I think is easy to overlook, but it's amazing how regulated Judge Merchan was during this trial. To be frank with you, at times I thought he was too fair to Trump. And the reason I felt that way was because I found myself thinking, I've seen people get incarcerated during a trial for being disrespectful to the judge at the bench when the jury is not present. These outbursts that Trump had inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom, I thought to myself, he's going so far, it's unfair to everyone else who stands trial. But
so you think he should have been, you think he should have been incarcerated when he violated those gag orders?
In my heart, I felt that way, yes. But now that the jury has found him guilty, it sure does give Merchan a lot of ammunition to say I was balanced and more than fair with this man, and therefore it further limits his ability to appeal based on Merchan's conduct.
Devlin, what are you suspecting when it comes to post-sentencing? So we're looking at July 11th for sentencing. We don't have any idea what this sentence is going to actually look like. But he's a presumptive Republican nominee for president. Just a couple of days later, he will accept that nomination and make his way towards November. Are we looking at a sentence that is delayed based upon appeal? And then what if he wins the White House?
Look, all of these things are possible, which is why this is such a fascinating case to cover. You know, I'm not a politics reporter. I'm just a, a court rat, basically. And I got to tell you, we're in uncharted territory here. And so we're going to have to see how the judge views all this stuff. We're going to have to see how Trump responds. Remember that Trump said in his, post-verdict announcement, he just called America a fascist country.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that basically dare a judge to give him some kind of punishment, incarceratory sentence. And so that is, a dangerous game, playing with fire. And we're going to have to see how these two things, the political world and the legal world, come to head with each other.
I'm sure, though, Devlin, Mershon understands that Trump was going to speak out after the sentencing. There's no way there was any expectations that Donald Trump was not going to be Donald Trump, or that he was not going to really be anybody who had just been found guilty on 34 counts of the falsification of business records, who was in the public eye. And so how much he'll actually take that into account, I think, is really in question. Can you talk me through what we can expect from an actual sentencing? What would it look like if, even though we're not going to have, obviously, cameras inside the courtroom, what's it going to look like for our reporters that are going to be writing to us, standing outside the courtroom, telling us what it looks like?
Right. So you're going to have the prosecutors get up and say and ask for what sentence they want. I will tell you, just in sort of the brass tacks of this, I think it's a relatively safer path for them to just ask for some sort of incarceratory sentence, even if that's, weekends, even if that's, house arrest, which obviously some people would view as not being an actual incarceratory sentence. I think it's the easier path for prosecutors to push for that. And given everything that Trump's done, I think they can make a lot of good arguments for why they think that should be the case. Then you're going to have Trump's lawyers make their argument for why it shouldn't be an incarceratory sentence. And I assume they're going to also ask that whatever sentences hold, that it's essentially suspended pending the appeal. I think that's going to be a real key issue in all this.
Okay.
And then, and I think this is where the real rubber hits the road, they're going to offer Trump a chance to speak before his sentence. And that is really where I think, he could do tremendous damage to his chances of getting out of that room clean, so to speak. And, I don't want to predict the future. I don't think anyone can. But I think we can all make a guess as to what sorts of things Trump might say in that situation.
So there's a possibility that Mershon could be on the bench and have in mind what he's going to do. And Donald Trump could speak and he could change it.
It's always possible. I mean, I think most judges go into a sentencing, especially because they have pre-sentence reports, with a pretty strong idea of where they're going. But the reason you hold the hearing, sadly, I'm a Jets fan, and there's a famous Jets sentence that you play to win the games. The reason you hold the hearing is to determine the sentence. And things can happen at that hearing that change the sentence. And with Donald Trump, things can be pretty unexpected.
Devlin Barrett, thank you. David Henderson, thank you as well.
As we continue our coverage of Donald Trump's guilty verdict in his New York criminal trial, it's important to keep emphasizing the historic, unprecedented moment our country is in. Never before has a former American president been indicted and convicted in a criminal case, let alone while running for president again. Our nation has never seen anything like this, but a look back at our history might offer some clues about how to move forward. So let's ask Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian and author of Presidents of War. Michael, as always, thank you very much for coming to the show.
Great to be together, as always. Thank you.
We have a guilty verdict against a former president on 34 criminal counts while he's also running for president. There's no legal or political precedent for what we are witnessing. But how does this compare to other destabilizing moments in our history?
Well, I think the choice is actually pretty clear. We've got a convicted felon, but, in days of yore, if a convicted felon had run, let's say, for alderman, which was probably about as high as he or she would have aspired until the last couple of decades, that person would have said, I served my time, I learned my lesson, I have remorse. There's going to be no one more zealous than I am in enforcing our legal system. Instead, you and I saw that rant at the bottom of the brass elevator in Trump Tower yesterday by the presumed Republican nominee of this year. And he's saying the system is rotten. I want to dismantle parts of the Constitution. I think that people should not respect the law. And so when you've got someone who is promising at the same time to be dictator for a day, and it'll never be for a day, as you know, it'll be for 4 years, if not for his lifetime, if that begins. At the same time as he's saying, I'm going to dismantle our rule of law, which is the glory of America, keeps the peace, assures fairness when it works for all Americans. You've got dictatorship and anarchy at the same time. Mm-hmm. Do you, Jonathan, think that a majority of Americans is going to vote for dictatorship and anarchy in November? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But however, we have seen some things, Michael, these last few years.
We have seen things we never expected.
Right. So the founding fathers seemed to have prepared for every threat to the republic that they created, but they didn't appear to have a convicted felon running for president on their bingo card. Would they be appalled by what happened on Thursday, meaning this former president, current candidate for president, being convicted on felony charges by a jury of his peers?
Most of the founders would cry if they saw what Donald Trump has been accused of and now convicted of, 34 felonies. Because they assumed when the Constitution was written, and you and I know these founders were by no means perfect people,
flawed.
But they thought that they had established a system that would keep convicted criminals out of the presidency. They assumed that anyone who ran for president would have the decency and the love of country and the knowledge of how hard it was to achieve our independence, that there would only be people of good character, like George Washington. And the other thing that they thought they had done was established a system, an electoral college, decentralized voting by states, other things, as well as an American public that would not willingly vote for a convicted criminal to be their president. They thought that that was so unlikely. You can read the record of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. There's not one word about what should we put in the Constitution to make sure that no convicted criminal becomes president. That's how far this country, sadly, has come. But I don't think a convicted criminal is going to be elected this fall.
And we've got less than a minute left, Michael. But what can Americans do to ensure that we get through this with our republic intact, especially because there are fears of political violence and calls for retribution?
This is going to be a 5 months period and maybe more of a kind that we have never seen before, sadly. We should brace ourselves and expect the worst. Hostile countries who want Trump elected, doing things in the world that make it look chaotic so that they can say Joe Biden is not in control. Upheaval fomented in the cities so that Donald Trump can say to the suburban women, let's say outside Philadelphia, you may not like me, but without me, you will not have law and order. Expect this. If we're lucky, it won't happen. If we're not lucky, it will. And make sure that through all of this, that central choice is preserved, that people understand this is a choice between Joe Biden, who loves democracy, and Donald Trump, who wants to bring you both dictatorship and anarchy at the same time. Make sure that people understand that's our choice.
Joining me now, Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California. The Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, founder and president of National Action Network, and author of Righteous Troublemakers, Untold Stories of the Social Justice Movement in America. Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast and MSNBC political analyst, and Michelle Goldberg, opinion columnist at the New York Times and also an MSNBC political analyst. This is fantastic to have all four of you on the show today. Congresswoman Waters, I'm starting with you because you predicted years ago, you said, I'm counting on Stormy. What do your reaction to Thursday's incredible verdict?
Thank you so very much for having us all on today. Let me just say it's a sad day for this country. I'm still shocked and amazed that his supporters would follow him with the lies and distortions that he continues to give to the American people. He says it's rigged. He says if they can do this to me, they can do it to you, bringing in others to cover the lies that he's telling. I'm amazed that those who claim to be so patriotic are so unpatriotic. I'm watching not only what happened in January 6th in Washington, D.C., but what is happening now. And men and women in the Republican Party don't have the courage nor the patriotism to stand up for democracy and what's good for America and understand and be able to honestly say to the American public that this used to be president, this former president is wrong. Whenever he loses, wherever he loses, he'll say it's rigged. He'll say that somehow he doesn't deserve to have to be lawful. Well, as the president said, no one is above the law. Those jurors on that jury are to be commended for what they have done. You had 7 men and 5 women who stepped up to the plate and did the hard work and rolled out to America and told America the truth. This man is guilty, not 1 time, 2 times, and 3 times, but on all 30 counts. That's amazing.
Right. 34 times. As you were speaking, Congresswoman, you probably weren't able to see him beforehand, but he was nodding in agreement when you were talking about Republicans not having the courage to stand up to stand up for the truth. Tim, what's up with these folks?
It's worse than that. What I was really nodding about is when Congresswoman Waters was talking about how they're being unpatriotic. I mean, it's hard to even, imagine this as somebody that grew up as a Republican. You'd think that it used to be the Republicans were like, if you turned the flag upside down and attacked the FBI and said that the U.S. justice system is rigged and that we're a banana republic, I mean, that would have been anathema to people in the Republican Party for years. And it was about American pride and respecting our institutions, respecting our systems. Now these people sound like anarchists. They are authoritarian. They want to tear down the entire justice system. You had Tim Scott there in your lead-in talking about how the justice system is hunting Republicans. This is absurd. Hunter Biden starts on trial, the president's son, in 2 days.
Right. And Rev, when we played that soundbite of Senator Scott talking about, vengeance and everything, you were like, whoa. Your reaction to that?
I don't know how you take just blatant lies and then end your comment quoting the Bible. That's why I said, well, that was a little difficult for me. But let me say this that I think we need to underscore. This whole case was about a man trying to cover his deeds because he wanted to win an election in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. And he had been exposed with the Access Hollywood tape where he talked about how you deal with women is to grope them, and I'm cleaning up what he really said, but many Americans have seen that. And if the Stormy Daniels affair had come out on top of that, it would have probably defeated him in his own mind. Now, the reason that is important is he was running against Hillary Clinton, talk about lock her up, about things that were absolutely ridiculous, some server at a house or something. He was saying lock her up. Fast forward to now, we find 34 felonies, and you've got Republicans saying, how dare you? That's how he got there, accusing somebody of a crime and covering up his crime when there was no crime. And what's at stake for America is if Hillary Clinton had become president, we wouldn't have had 3 Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe versus Wade, hurt voting rights, and turned down affirmative action. That was the difference for people that said voting doesn't matter.
And Michelle, let me bring you in here before we go to a break, because I'm going to read something to you from The Cut. And it said, if Donald Trump ends up in a jail cell this year, it will be thanks in part to the remarkable testimony of a porn star whom he's been doing everything in his power to shame, silence, and discredit for 8 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, and she has been through hell and has been so brave and so steadfast. And the fact that she testified at all is evidence of Donald Trump's unbelievable self-defeating stubbornness. There was actually no reason for her to testify, except that Donald Trump's defense insisted not only that there was nothing illegal about the hush money scheme, but that he hadn't slept with her at all. It's just this kind of lies on top of lies, which can be a little bit more than a little bit. They're often numbing in the political sphere, but we've seen that they don't work in the legal sphere.
You know, I want to bring up something that Speaker Johnson said, his reaction to the verdict. Let's play that, and then we'll talk about it.
I do believe the Supreme Court should step in. Obviously, this is totally unprecedented, and it's dangerous to our system. I think that the justices on the court, I know many of them personally, I think they're deeply concerned about that as we are. So I think they'll set this straight, but it's going to take a while. You're right. The process takes a while to play out. This will be overturned, guys. There's no question about it. It's just going to take some time.
Tim, the Supreme Court, do they have any jurisdiction over that? What is he talking about?
I mean, these guys have become so presumptuous that they really do think that the Supreme Court is a political arm that is just going to do their bidding. I mean, that is how they act. You know, that is how they treat the Supreme Court. That is how Samuel Alito acts when he feels like he can just go to Fox and lie about what happened, with the flag outside his house. So I think that, no, they don't have any jurisdiction, but that's just one lie about this whole process. Tim Scott, going back to Tim Scott, he said that the Biden administration did this prosecution when it was a DA. There was no DOJ involvement about this. So they don't understand the system or they're blatantly lying about it.
And Rev, the thing that jumped out at me, even more so than just the entire thing of what the speaker just said, is when he said, I know many of them personally.
That's right. I know many of them personally, implying that they and he are on the same page, that they're not going to be making a judicial decision, is that they're aligned politically, and in this case, maybe aligned in terms of Donald Trump. Because why would you even say, I know them personally, when you're saying that they ought to be ruling on fairness of law?
On the merits.
It is to confirm what many of us have suspected, that these were political nominees based on some partisan commitment, and that is why we have deep concerns about this court.
Everybody, Congressman, real fast.
Okay, you started out talking about I had predicted this. I knew Stormy was a very strong woman and that she was not going to take it from Donald Trump. And she stepped forward detail by detail, and I expected her to do that. And because of her, this case has gotten to where it had gotten to. And she was the one that caused them to discover that he had lied on and filed false documents.
Ruth Bengia, Michael Beschloss, and Lisa Rubin are back with us. You know, before we went to break, what Ruth was saying made me think about the fact that I think that a lot of Americans out here really believe that Donald Trump won't be able to go as rogue as he's saying he wants to. He won't be able to be a dictator on day one, right, or throughout his presidency, because there are guardrails to stop him. And I am most concerned about the fact that there are no guardrails.
There are no guardrails.
There are no guardrails for Donald Trump. Michael Beschloss, like, it is the Congress, under this current Congress, is not going to be a guardrail, and let alone Republicans in Congress. I mean, the Speaker of the House was one of the chief cheerleaders of the insurrection and the Stop the Steal movement. This Supreme Court is not going to be a guardrail. We are still waiting with bated breath for the immunity decision. The guardrails don't exist. Like, who the president is matters. And the staff won't be a guardrail either, because Donald Trump has told us he's not going to hire people that are going to try to hold him accountable, like the generals of his last administration.
Take everything that Donald Trump says extremely seriously. You're absolutely right. Justices on the Supreme Court, we've seen it in the last month, are complicit. They are right now dragging their feet on presidential immunity on this case so that this January 6th case cannot go forward before the election. That's not the only motive, but everything we know suggests that a majority of the justices are perfectly fine with that. That is a big flashing red light. If Donald Trump comes into the presidency and controls Congress. You've seen the way that leading Republicans have reacted to this verdict. They're basically mimicking what he says. The verdict is part of a legal system and a rule of law that's rotten and should be thrown out. You have a presidency. Presidents have too much power in this country. They run the Department of Justice. They run the Defense Department, the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons. If you've got a president who wants to become a dictator, unfortunately, the founders in our Constitution did not protect us. What's going to stop it? Impeachment? How has that worked out? He was impeached twice. It was like a snowflake falling on the Potomac. So all I'm saying is that if Donald Trump is elected, you have to assume that he is going to go right through with his promise to be a dictator, not for a day, but perhaps for the rest of our lifetimes, and at the same time wreck our rule of law that expands our rights and assures that people don't commit murder and arson, and assures that investors want to invest in the United States economy because it's stable. So you've got essentially a dictator who is promising to wreck our system of laws with the complicity of certain people on the Supreme Court, certain people in Congress. And so essentially you had something we have never seen in American history, the promise of dictatorship and anarchy at the same time. Is that what Americans want in November? I don't think.
Lisa, Simone is asking about future guardrails, and I think that is the right question for all of us to be asking, given that what he is doing is setting up a future framework. In real time, I think one of the guardrails is actually fact-checking all of the things that he is saying. You've already fact-checked the idea from him, from other Republicans, that this should have been brought 7 years ago, but that is not the only lie that is embedded in his rhetoric.
There are so many, Alicia, it's hard to know where to start. I mean, I think one of the biggest lies here is that the gag order precluded him from testifying. So let's just break that apart for a second. The gag order, as Judge Merchan told him very patiently, only applies to extrajudicial statements, meaning things you say out of court. To the extent that Donald Trump feels like some ruling of Judge Merchan made it impossible for him to testify, it was because New York State provides for a proceeding called the Sandoval hearing. That means that before a defendant makes a decision about whether to testify, they're entitled to know what the scope of the cross-examination is going to be. During that hearing, Judge Merchan did not give the prosecutors everything that they wanted. In fact, he made it very clear that they weren't allowed to ask him about other accusations of sexual misconduct. But they were allowed, if he were to testify, to ask him about other prior rulings that have come down against him, including the 2 E. Jean Carroll rulings, the civil fraud ruling, and the settlement about Trump University. All of those were fair game because they bear on his credibility and they bear on his honesty with the jury. If Donald Trump wants to get out there now and say that precluded him from testifying, that was his decision and his decision alone. He was in no way blocked from taking the witness stand, and the defense that his side put on to only put on 2 witnesses, one of whom was Bob Costello, who had his own real problems on the stand, that too was their decision. They never called people who would have given an account, theoretically, partial to Donald Trump, like Keith Schiller, his former bodyguard, or Alan Weisselberg, the former CFO of the Trump Organization. They could have called him despite the fact that he's serving a term in Rikers right now. So for all of those reasons, Donald Trump needs to be fact-checked on that and his other characterizations of what happened in that courtroom that I sat in for all 22 days of the trial. When his allies go out there and say, this was a trial that's rigged, I find that funny in part because people like J.D. Vance, who showed up for a morning or an afternoon, sat with their heads in their phones tweeting the entire time. It's not clear to me what they took away from attending the trial other than performatively to say that they were there and then go outside to speak to the cameras. The real people who saw the trial day in and day out, the 100+ members of the press corps who were there, they have a very different take on what went on within that courtroom. And those of us who were there should continue to bear witness and speak truth to his power.
So in speaking truth to power, this relates back, Ruth, to what Simone raised about guardrails. And the guardrails part of this is extremely important. The problem is the guardrails have been weakened. And I give you Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, in an interview with the Atlantic's McKay Coppins, noted this. Bragg should have settled the case against Trump, as would have been the normal procedure. You could talk to Lisa about that. Wouldn't have been. But he made a political decision. Bragg may have won the battle for now, but he may have lost the political war. Democrats think they can put out the Trump fire with oxygen. It's political malpractice. For me, the political malpractice are statements like this. Because first off, it goes against the logic of how the case unfolds, and Lisa touched on some of what the defendant can do, what the prosecutors can do. But the bigger picture, Ruth, is the guardrails that's put in place by those who know better or should know better, who stand in the defense of liberty instead of capitulating to authoritarianism. How dangerous is that piece as we talk about all these other aspects of this if we're continually weakened by current leaders who don't have you-know-what to stand up to someone like Trump? As they said in 2016, now having lived 8 years of this, I would think they'd be more inclined to do it, but they're more inclined to capitulate.
Yeah, this is a symptom of what I'm calling, the moral collapse of Republicans, and what we see from Mitt Romney is that it's extended to kind of blunt the edges of even people who are not MAGA, and it shows how, and this has happened in other times and places, years of this has weakened people, and they have moved so far to the right. Even if they're not MAGA, they are still not, they're not old-fashioned conservatives anymore. Old-fashioned conservatives don't back coups to overthrow the government. They don't want anarchy, like Michael was saying before. And, the other points to this is that the MAGA has been waging a parallel information warfare to legal warfare. They're battling in the courtroom. And Trump's has thousands of, lawsuits for many years. That's how he operates, way before he was president. But there's also information warfare. And so the reason those clones showed up with the red ties, this is also very fascist. They have to remake themselves in the image of the leader and physically as well. And that's very scary. And that also shows you how far we've fallen and how these things happen over time. And so the purpose of coming was, of course, to show loyalty to Trump. But the real purpose, that's why Vance was there tweeting, is to disseminate the propaganda talking points, because the GOP is now an autocratic entity and it has a party line. And you've seen how these responses about the trial and the verdict have been very coordinated. And that's something that's also a huge success of Trump's, but a huge, a huge liability for our democracy.
All right, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Michael Beschloss, Lisa Rubin, thank you very much for starting our morning.